right, welcome everyone. Board is back in open session. At this point, we have a welcome from Hollywood Principal Kim Hefner.
Good evening, and as always, I'd like to welcome you to Hollywood Elementary School. We love having you guys over here. And I also want to thank you for the time that you give and the energy that you give to the children and families of District 96. At the end of the day today, I do have something to share with you. I was able to complete the course catalog for summer school. We have 20 enrichment classes on the books, some new ones that we're excited about. There's a new volleyball camp. We've got some horticulture classes that we're excited about, and some new technology classes as well. So I've got a copy of that to share with each of you. Great. Thank you.
Really cool course. Like, you just don't even know the stuff that's involved.
I'm excited. There's one called Little Sprouts for kindergarten through second graders, and then another 2-hour-long class for 3rd through 8th graders.
That's cool.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, thanks, Ms. Hefner. Next up, do we have any public comment? If there's no public comment, then does any board member have any proposed changes to the agenda? If not, we move right into the committee meetings. First committee is education. Sherry?
Ms. Brownlow, we have a curriculum update first. We'll start with that.
Good evening, everybody. Our school is March, but here we are. I'm going to go through a couple of things this evening. I'm going to start with a math implementation update for K through 8, and directly following that, I'm going to jump to the memo for the recommendation for the double advanced math class at Hauser because it's all tied to mathematics. Then we'll do a little science update, and Kelly King, our instructional tech coordinator, or tech specialist, will be joining me to talk a little bit about that. And then at the end, we will talk a little bit about Yale Bilingual. So before I get started with the math, I just wanted to note that our 3 math interventionists are here this evening. So Meg Downs, who covers Ames, Aaron Defke, who covers Hollywood and Blythe, and Julie Dauschus, who covers Hauser. And then we have a long-term substitute covering in Alicia Patterson's place over at Central, who's not here with us this evening. But part of their role is not just to work with our students who might need some supports. They also are sort of the glue of our math department, K through 8, in that they see all the classrooms and work with all the teachers. And so they spend a great deal of their time collaborating and checking in with one another to be sure that the expectations, the pacing, and the experiences that the students are having across District 96 is consistent and equitable. So they're really here in case you have any boots on the ground questions that you want answered. They're really our go-to people when it comes to supporting out in the field, along with the work that I do. So I wanted to start by reviewing the implementation with our RB data in terms of how our students are placing, because we just got the data for our current 8th graders who are going to be headed there as freshmen next year. So that top row is the honors geometry, which is the double acceleration piece as they head to RB. And so the percentage of students qualifying for that level, you can see in that top row. The second row is the honors algebra class. And so totally in honors, our current 8th graders, 9th graders, and 10th graders are on that chart. And you can see that over the last 3 years, we've had a larger and larger percentage qualifying for honors coursework over at RB, which is really nice to see. And also combined core, which is the core algebra class, along with honors, we've also seen us go from 83% of the students to qualifying for core or higher to 93% of the students this coming year who will be entering RB qualifying for honors or higher. So that's a nice trend to see, when we're excited about that. And then this is a little small on the screen, but you have it in your packet in presentation mode. You've seen this data. This was from November. This is the overall math percentage of meets and exceeds on our PARCC assessment for the last 4 years. And again, we were down at 53% in 2015, and we're now at 62%, meeting and exceeding this past year in 2018. So a little bit about the implementation that's gotten us those awesome results. We are in year 4 of implementation of Carnegie at our middle school. And we are in year 3 of our implementation of Math in Focus at our elementary buildings. And across K through 8, we have been utilizing 10 Marks for the last 3 years as a supplemental resource. 10 Marks is something that provides enrichment opportunities and some support opportunities based on students' individual needs. And then we've also had some additional supports out there working to strengthen our math instruction. So we've had the MCMI coaching experience, which is the Mathematics Consortium, the Midwest Mathematics Consortium that we work with, and we have a math coach that we've been contracting with from there that's been working at our elementary level. And we've also had our team from Hauser has attended MCMI professional development sessions, workshop format, over the last 3 years pretty consistently. And then we also partnered with Concordia a few years ago, and we've been having at least 3 students per year come and join us for a trimester to be in the classroom supporting student instruction as they are working towards their math instruction education credentials at Concordia. So we had that partnership in place as well. So now I want to move in and talk a little bit about the instructional strategies and resources that we're utilizing across our programs and how they work for us. So in both Math in Focus and Carnegie, there is what is considered direct instruction whole group, where they are using the textbook to model examples that include manipulatives and solving problems. They also engage what are called math talks, where students are talking to one another about how to solve a particular problem and sharing their ideas. The sharing of student work is really important for reinforcing and modeling of mathematics and for students to hear multiple ways for solving problems. That's a huge emphasis across our curriculum, K through 8. There's also a lot of collaborative grouping that happens, so students can engage with one another around their thinking and challenge each other around their thinking. And we like to have them engage in what we call math discourse, which is conversations about how they are solving problems. There is individual and practice and reinforcement built into the program, and that happens based on the formative assessments that the teachers are doing as they're delivering that direct instruction, as well as different activities that provide them with data related to the work that they're expected to do. And so based on that, they'll match students to what additional in practice is necessary and needed, and that's really going to vary for each student within the classroom and across classrooms, depending on what it is students are demonstrating their readiness for. The idea is that they're all trying to support the students to working towards mastery. So it will look different based upon who the students are. One of the things that I wanted to highlight is that at Hauser, there's one large consumable book that has the direct instruction sort of like beginning of the lesson features in it combined with the workbook. And at elementary, we have a textbook that some of the direct instruction comes from, and then they have several workbooks. They have a regular core workbook, they have an enrichment, and a extra skills practice. So depending on the needs of the kids, where their practice comes from might vary. They might be doing problems in the core workbook, they might be working through problems in the enrichment book, they might be working through problems in the extra skills practice book. So there's varying resources that can be utilized. And a lot of times when they're working through problems from the workbooks or even from the textbook, they're often doing it on whiteboards or on their devices or up at the board to model with one another the work that they're doing. So before they get to that independent practice piece, there's a lot of sharing and collaborating that's going on, and they may be working through problems together in a visual kind of way rather than on the paper pencil, so maybe on the whiteboard or on their device. But through all of that, the kids' needs are being met so that they're making the appropriate progress as they move through that curriculum. As I mentioned, these interventionists this year have been working really closely to look at strategies that are working, sharing ways that teachers are working with students where they're finding success, really looking at that small group, flexible, differentiated instruction. And I think that's this year been a huge emphasis. And I see Mrs. Stepke shaking her head. I was just with her and a 5th grade teacher from Hollywood today where we were talking about the way they're grouping students and working with them individually. So they're communicating with one another to also shape the way these resources are being utilized in the classroom. And so that consistency is very helpful in sort of making sure that the kids are having similar experiences. So that's what I wanted to highlight there. we feel like we've had a lot of continuity. We've had a lot of discussions this year about looking at gap analysis for our struggling learners, as well as ways to continue to enrich our higher end. We're going to be looking at some resources for Tier 3 MTSS that we might be pulling in supplementally because 10 marks is going to be sunsetting after this year. Amazon sold it and no one, or let go of it, and no one's picked it up. So at this point, we'll be looking for something else to do some of that supplemental work that we've been doing. So questions on this portion?
This curriculum, I think for me, it is.
I think for Carnegie,
Giving the teachers for Carnegie, especially the junior high level, the time to
I think
work through all these processes.
Julie,
you guys would be able to
I'll
speak
let
to
you.
that.
Absolutely. I think a lot of most of the other math teachers would say they couldn't imagine doing, even though when you read the book and the casing in the book might say that it's designed
Possible.
for 45 minutes, just to be able to include the differentiation and the really rich discourse and group work and everything, I couldn't imagine it without thinking that.
So one question. So just looking at the numbers you had on the PARC test, looks like we've made some quite a bit of progress there, which is great. Obviously, the numbers are better every year. But I guess at some fundamental level, what is it? What do you think is the reason why we still, let's say, like if you take the most recent year, 38% of the students are not meeting expectations in the PARC. What is the cause? What's the root cause? If you take one of those students in that category, what is it that is causing them not to be in the meet or exceed expectation? What is the piece there that's missing, for a typical student in that category?
So I'll let them chime in.
Yeah.
I would say there's not one root cause because the students in that category, their profiles could look extremely different from student to student to student. So I don't know, it could very well be different causes for different students depending on which one you're looking at in that category. Erin and Meg and Julie all work directly with some of those students who aren't meeting. I don't know if there's something specific you want to add.
We're going to try to figure that out ourselves, and like she said, I don't think there's a real specific reason. There's not like one thing that all the kids are missing. It really depends on the child. I do think a big part of it too is I've really been digging into the PARC questions since I am new to this position, and I didn't get PARC tests before because I was a second grade teacher. And in looking at all the past tests that have been given out and going over questions, and we've been working to practice questions a little bit more with kids, there's just a really different structure to some of the questions in PARC that is not the same as math testing and is not the same as some of the testing in MIF. So I think part of it too is just the strategies in doing those styles of questions. So those are some of the things we're trying to practice.
And some of those kids are struggling readers who are also struggling in mathematics. So when they have to break the problems down on something like PARC, and that's why I shared this data, when you look at how our kids matriculate when they leave us, which I think is really important because that's our end game, is how are we preparing our kids for the high school? Our kids that are matriculating, we only have 7% of our current 8th graders that are not matriculating into a core class. So when you look at that data versus PARC, we're doing well on a day-to-day curriculum-based level, and the kids, by the time they're leaving us, are getting where they need to be. So when you're looking at the variance at the lower grades and at the lower levels, sometimes it is the reading that's getting in the way. Sometimes it's background knowledge when they see problems and they don't know what the question really is asking from a background knowledge perspective. And I'll just give an example. Today I was working in a classroom with a group of kids, or actually it was yesterday at Blythe. I was subbing in first grade while we were doing math coaching, and there was a book about the supermarket. And the word supermarket was not familiar to about a third of those kids. So we went through all the synonyms. It's a grocery store, and what do you buy at the grocery store? And we had to build the background knowledge for several students who don't even go shopping with their parents. And so some of that, when you get a math question that's worded and it's a word problem and they have to work through it, particularly at the elementary levels, because a lot of those two-part questions are word problems, kids might also be lacking background knowledge to even access it, and then their focus becomes on the words versus the mathematics when they're trying to work through some of that. But that's just one set of students. They're, like Erin was saying, I think there's lots of different reasons depending on the child.
So I think you answered the question mostly, but when you have kids who need extra help in both math and reading or math and comprehension, the comprehension needs to come first before the math skills, or can you work in parallel?
We work in
Or it just
parallel.
depends?
We work in parallel. And for some students who are very significant, we will then create what's called a personal needs profile. And then on a standardized assessment, they can have the math questions read to them. But they're very specific about how you can do that, so.
You can't give extra explanation, I assume. when
Correct. You
read
can only
the
read it.
question. So
Right.
that's not
Correct.
that much of a help when we're
Correct.
talking about comprehension.
Correct. So we work on both simultaneously. So kids who are getting reading support, they're getting exposed to vocabulary, and we're trying to also look at content vocabulary as well as within the reading curriculum so that we're cross-pollinating, building background knowledge across all our disciplines, science, social studies, mathematics, as well as working in reading. And our reading curriculum is really great for that. We were just talking the other day when we did training, because our new reading curriculum is so focused around science and social studies themes. Each unit has a theme that connects back to social studies and science. It's also providing some of that language. And when we start talking about the science units we're building, we're going to talk about some of the math standards that are also embedded in the science that we're doing. So as we start to connect all of these dots, being able to build more robust background knowledge for students will be benefiting them as they're coming up in the system, and we start putting all these things together.
Can you talk about the proportion of our questions are word question related, or is it that they're all worded strangely and they're asked to do a task that way, or are there
I would say there's
traditional questions as well? Because, you know, as parents, we don't get to see more than
Right.
a small sample of what the questions would look like for the child.
Right.
So what would you say?
I would say, like the 3 questions that we're really targeting and trying to work on that are tougher, looking at an entire test, there's a significant portion of them that requires some kind of comprehension. And then on top of that, the 3 styles of questions that are probably the trickiest is the extended response, where they have to explain how they got their answer and what their thinking was. And a lot of times, because writing is truly, in my opinion, the hardest thing kids have to do in elementary school. Because you're taking all these thoughts and putting it together, and you know, they'll tell you easier than they can write it. And so sometimes they leave things out, and we're working on showing them, you know, having them practice giving answers, and then also reflecting upon answers, like looking at the answer and talking about, is this a great answer? Is this not a great answer? What makes it a better answer? What makes it not a great answer? You know, those kind of things, really trying to evaluate writing to help them evaluate it themselves as they're doing it. Another kind of question is they have a multi-part question. So
Those are the
sometimes
ones.
they're dependent. So if you get the first answer incorrect,
Right.
Yeah.
every other part of it's
It's like freshman
incorrect
biology in
because it's
college.
dependent.
Right.
And
Track.
sometimes it's not dependent. It's looking at the same information in 2 different ways, and they don't always do that. And then the third style of question that's tricky is that they give a multiple choice question, but there's multiple answers that you're supposed to select.
Yeah.
So sometimes they see that one correct answer.
And they
do it
think they
because
have
they're
it.
done, but it says to select a 3, or it says, you know, let's select all the answers that can be correct.
Do we have a strategy on stranding writing
So-
throughout curriculum?
So
Through different disciplines?
our math and focus curriculum does have performance-based assessments that require the kids to write and to write out their thinking, as well as Carnegie does too. So the kids are constantly writing in mathematics as well as science, and Kelly can speak a little bit to those pilot units this year. So they are writing across the curriculum, but when you're asking about the struggling learner, I think that's one of the challenges.
No, I
is-
mean, yeah, I mean like a strategy to take on
Yeah.
and teach that.
Yeah, and they also have, and Meg, I think you have it hanging in your space. They have like a script for the kids about how they're to write an answer that explains their thinking. So we do give them the sentence starters and the sort of that close writing experience to say, okay, first I did this because I did that. So we have a common language and script that they're using with the struggling learners to help them build that capacity to respond to their questions. But it takes them longer to develop some of those skills. And some of it is test-taking skills, which That's what, and Meg's shaking her head too. And that's a lot of what we've been working on with the struggling students, because even our higher performing students, when we issue a curriculum-based assessment that's just based on what we teach, oftentimes their mistakes aren't that they don't understand the content or concepts, it's they didn't read carefully. And we know that in their daily work. And when you get Park, which is much more high stakes, our struggling learners, they're so focused on, I got that first correct answer, I'm done, and I'm not going back to
This is
find.
on a computer screen, and I think are they scrolling?
Yeah,
I
they
think
are.
well, even for me, to scroll and then to remember a passage and to come back and analyze it is a different kind of skill than having it in front of you when we used to take tests. So I think that is a huge challenge.
I think you're right. That's why I wanted to start here too. It's like as they get more and more practice, as we're getting them ready to leave us, I feel like we're seeing the progress of where we want our students to
What's that
land.
algebra core, though? What does that mean exactly?
That's their core class. Like that's the class that 8th graders would be expected to matriculate into.
And what would be, so after that, they would take geometry sophomore year?
So honors geometry would be sophomore year typically, yes. And honors algebra is something that if you're not ready for geometry, it's like your advanced track as a 9th
Do
grader.
most of those kids in the algebra core take the full 4-year math and go into a more complex? Do they even take AP?
They
or
can,
anything like
yeah, they
that?
can.
Is that often done, or is that?
Well, RB, you can accelerate.
I know there are a lot of.
Yeah, you can
choices.
accelerate and get there in
I'm just
different
wondering, do
ways.
they do it? Do they?
I haven't asked them that specific
I think it would be
question, but
interesting to see where they
what they have said about the double accelerated students who start out in geometry, they end up taking like a stats.
Multiples,
like,
yeah.
so, yeah. So,
Or
exactly.
calculus, yeah.
But even they'll finish calculus sometimes junior year and then end up taking like an additional math
Mm-hmm.
class. Some of the kids we're going to talk about next that are
Yeah.
double tier and then place into the 9th grade curriculum as 8th graders. They'll end up doing like just a different kind of AP class that's math-based. For fun.
Do you have a sense as Park is changing, and I can't remember what the new name is going to be,
Illinois.
IAR.
is the new version of Park going to be closer to what our curriculum is like, or is it going to still be kind of different as you described?
Well, I would say our curriculum supports what we're trying to do on Park. It's just not laid out exactly the same way all the time because it addresses the standards, right? The
Right.
layout of Park is going to look similar because they're using the same exact item bank that they did.
Which is what you said.
Correct. So it's going to be shorter, and it'll be interesting to see because we were talking about this today. My guess is that in shortening it, and I haven't seen, you can't see a prototype, you can only see practice questions, so until I actually see the assessment itself, it's hard to say. But being that it's 20 minutes shorter, my guess is they lopped off one of the more open-ended questions, and they'll stick probably with more of the multiple choice, and maybe they'll have one of those longer, lengthier responses versus two in a test session, because there were two in those sessions.
And that brings up the other part that's hard for kids is the stamina, because we're just trying to build up for the writing stamina. I know that at both the small schools that I work at, that they are writing every day in all these classrooms. Just trying to work on that, getting their thoughts down and organizing them, but then also just having the stamina to get it done.
Have we considered taking breaks during standardized testing?
Where we're allowed, so with kids with accommodations can take breaks
Just
in the
to let
administration.
them recover?
So there are kids who have it as an accommodation, then you can provide it.
Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
everybody. Everybody
You
could use this.
you can't in the administration of it give.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Yeah. You can for students who have it written into their accommodations,
That's
you can give
interesting.
breaks. But in a single session, you can't stop the class, give a
Not
break.
necessarily between one topic.
Oh,
but
yeah.
Between topics.
Yeah, no, we don't give them back to back like that, yeah.
No, I mean even.
It's not chunked.
Yeah.
It's not chunked like,
That would be interesting.
something like COGAT, you could, because
Yeah.
there's subtests. There aren't subtests within a session of Park.
Yeah, I still wonder if we could put in something that would allow them to, I mean, to not sit for hours and then be expected to perform at a certain level. Even an hour and a half is a long time. I mean.
Yeah, you can't,
it's
in
a
the
long time.
administration of it, it's pretty spelled out as to how you have to
Maybe
administer.
we could petition that to the state.
Yeah,
and
we could
see.
try. The teachers are pretty good about following exactly what the administration guidelines
Okay.
state for us.
Be
So,
interesting.
but just so you know, that kids that do need those breaks, that do have some, you know, even in our MTSS program, we can give those students breaks because they have what's called a personal need profile.
Yeah.
So we have done that. So you don't have to have an IEP or a 504, but you have to have a documented need. Any other questions about that?
Just one follow-up question. You mentioned the workbooks. I'm just wondering how heavily are the workbooks used in our program? I mean,
So it depends what you mean by how heavily, because there are several different tools that teachers can utilize for math and focus that I talked about. There's the enrichment, there's the skills, there's the core, and then in Carnegie, there's the core workbook plus a skills practice workbook. Across our district, whether there's teachers who have 90 to 100% meeting and exceeding, or teachers who have less percentages of students meeting and exceeding, they utilize the workbook tools very similarly across the board, and they'll do approximately 60 to 75% of those tools they'll use throughout, but again, it's based on, and that's on average, it's based on what kids need. So if you have kids who are struggling, you're not going to assign them 30 problems due until you're sure they can do them correctly. So you might be working in the skills practice book and having them do more scaffolding of those skills before they're ready to tackle a problem, right? And if you have a kid who's mastered it, you're not going to have them do an excessive amount of problems if they've demonstrated mastery. So again, it's going to be based on the student's needs, and it varies across classrooms.
Do we have a goal for the teachers to try and get to a certain point? I mean,
Well,
knowing obviously that there are scaffolding opportunities.
To get through the pacing of the units
Yes.
is our goal, is to
Yes.
get, because when we first adopted it, we weren't necessarily getting the right amount of time through each of the units when the kids had all the gaps. Now that the kids we've had it in place for 3 years, our pacing this year across the board, particularly at grades 3, where I would say a lot of 2, 3, and 4, where a lot of background knowledge was missing, is much better. And they're all shaking their heads, but.
And all of our books are online too. So, for example, our second grade teachers are currently just doing the money unit. And before they actually addressed the money unit that's presented in second grade, they went back to first grade. So they actually were printing off a lot of those workbook pages because they're able to access all the grades. So it wasn't actually inside the workbook, and it came out as a page. So they might be accessing grades below and some grades above to fill in those gaps. Make sure the students are accessing.
Are there any, I just have one last question. Are there any general content areas that the team might have noticed that we could focus more on? Are there any
Yes.
trends content area-wise?
Geometry.
Thank you. That's important. No, I think it's important. If
Yeah.
we don't identify
We've
a
recommended-
content area trend.
Geometry, we've all
how
talked
do you
about
know?
it. Yep.
Yeah.
And actually what,
I would think that's true.
and
Yeah.
and these guys, we just talked about this, creating, Erin and I just had this conversation last week, actually. We talked about how with geometry, what would be sort of easy to do when we're doing multiplication arrays is to bring in the area piece and do a mini lesson on area when we're introducing, because what often happens is the geometry unit might also be later in the year, so the exposure and the timing of it, we don't see the kids ramping up as quickly. So we could take the mini lessons and embed them in the other units where they're connected, so that that exposure is happening earlier before they get to the geometry unit itself.
Ooh,
So
you
that-
could even preface proof language
Correct.
with their verbal structure and the way that they're learning how to read proof
With the
language.
evidence, yeah.
Because it'll happen later. I think that'd be
Yeah.
interesting to get them accustomed to the way that they represent their evidence for their geometry problems.
Right.
That would be
And-
fascinating.
And at the younger grades, we're embedding it through the calendar time. So we did a whole in-service with kindergarten this year on really starting to tackle geometry as part of their daily routine in the calendar. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, so staying with mathematics, I put a memo in there around our double accelerated students at Hauser. So this year at RB as a freshman, we have one student that qualified for that program, and it has been walking to RB. The year before, we started out with 3 students, but then 2 moved, and we ended up with just 1 as well. This coming year, our current 7th graders, there are 6 students that, after the placement test, are going to qualify for geometry as 8th graders. And so I outlined for you in the memo some of the challenges that we've run into with just one student being placed at RB. Not that we couldn't overcome them. We've worked through them and we have addressed those challenges. But with a group of 6, we foresee that those challenges might become a bit greater, managing 6 students going over first period and coming back. With our declining enrollment in 8th grade, we are able to open up one of the math teachers and still have reasonable class sizes at core to deliver that geometry program at Hauser next year so that the students would not have to travel. This would be similar to what we do with small group instruction at the other end of our program. So we talk about MTSS as the at-risk students that are at one end and our enrichment students that are at the other end, and we do offer a small group classroom at the low end. This would be similar in offering a small group classroom at the higher end to allow our students to remain at Hauser for this instruction next year, and then when they matriculate to, if they were to matriculate to RB, they would be placed in the same class that they would be if they were walking over for the coursework. We've been working with the principal, the assistant principal for curriculum, April May, our principal, and Mary Banholzer, our 8th grade advanced math teacher, to talk about what that looks like, and we would be using their same course materials to deliver the class, and they would matriculate exactly the same way. The only thing they wouldn't have the opportunity to do is to earn the credit at the high school.
Yeah, that's what's interesting to me, because I've actually talked to a lot of these families, and RB is very unwilling to allow students during the summer to take it, even if it's at a university, to earn credit for these content area courses, stating that they simply weren't the right age at the time. And I find that troubling that we're limiting the progression of students that could otherwise move at their potential. So I'm curious to see how they'll work with this and why credit wouldn't be due if they could prove.
Right. So
if they could prove.
So that's an RB issue that I can't. Yeah.
Which is it's their decision, obviously. Right.
But here's the conversation I did have with them, because that was sort of one of the concerns I raised, was like, okay, so if we're offering it here and you're not going to do that, and they said, and I also have emailed this group of parents, by the way, who have these students, just to say we're considering this, so it's not going to be shocking to them if we say we're going to offer it to Hauser. Nobody has emailed me back with that concern, and I did explain the difference.
They may not know. Because
no, I did. I explained it. No, I explained it. I explained the difference and what would happen and why. So they're aware. But I put that all up front because I didn't want it to be a surprise. Yeah. But one of the things that RB said is that they aren't worried, this is their perspective, they're not worried about these particular students earning math credit for that year, because these kids typically take additional math classes at RB, exploring their options so that they can get college credit because they want to enter college with that credit and they have a passion for it. So they're not worried about them not earning the math credits to graduate.
No, but what about would it be placed then in the next course when they get to high school, or will they be put back in geometry?
No, they'll place into the next course. Yes.
That was a concern because they aren't really willing to do that now.
Well, they would be for this group of students because they'd be identified.
They won't, they just won't.
So you're saying this class would be
they may not if they haven't received the coursework.
Well,
so
they don't consider it equivalent coursework unless it's with them, but they don't even offer it during the summer themselves.
Right, but this they would consider equivalent because we would be working with them to deliver the same curriculum.
I hope so.
Yeah, we had a meeting about
it. It would be identical, basically. It would be exactly the same.
Correct.
Test,
correct.
homework,
same textbooks, same.
Actually, we're talking about more instructional time, though, for the kids.
We would actually deliver it in a comprehensive model so that we'd be able to deliver their curriculum and fill in the Algebra 2 gaps that we sometimes see.
And what kind of time would that be?
In the same 80-minute block that our core kids are getting.
So they'd be getting all of the geometry they would have gotten
plus
at RB.
Plus Algebra 2. Plus Algebra 2.
But it would be identical curriculum, identical pacing, everything would be the same.
Correct. They'd be kind of following the RB curriculum guide.
Right.
Mary would be doing
the same standards in terms of testing.
I still don't understand the high school credit. I don't see what the...
Well, they said that's in their policy.
Either the content's there or the content's not there, and if it's the same text...
They explained to me that it's in their policy, so that would be something to take out.
I understand that, and I think the policy is something that could be looked at, actually, on a global scale. I think that's worth looking at.
I mean, that's something they'd have to decide they want to open up.
We certainly look into it. Familiar with another high school district that did the same, and there's kind of a philosophical issue too. And it's interesting, like I've also heard families say, I don't want the credit and I don't want the grade
Some
because
of
I
them
don't want it in
don't.
their GPA.
That's right.
Yeah.
But high schools tend to sort of, that's been my experience also, not deliver it on their
Terms.
their location. But I think that this would be the equivalent course, and we absolutely do know that they would honor it as completed coursework and then allow them to place
move
it
into
to the
the
next
next-
level.
I understand that, but the credit, they did the work, that's what I don't understand, you know?
Yeah. And that's a conversation we can keep trying to have.
Yeah, and that's their decision,
Yeah.
that's a separate
I mean-
board issue for their board,
Right.
but,
To me, if you can do this at the same caliber, plus additionally
it
do
can be
some
done.
algebra and
Yeah.
not have it cost anymore, that seems like
Yeah.
a win for our students.
And
What
it's
would happen
easier
if
on
we have a-
the students and their families.
They don't travel as far, right.
So,
What do you,
so
what-
if
you'd hope that these are
what's the
children have a
enrollment like
passion
with the
for
class
math.
behind them?
Yeah.
Because
So
what does it drop?
it's
What's happening
well,
after?
that's a smaller class too, but it's also based on the number of students we would have
Absolutely.
being eligible. So right now in the class behind,
Yes, right.
there's not anybody, and the class behind that, there's one. So we might go back to saying it
Yeah,
makes more
yeah.
sense to offer it at RB, but
Right,
when we
Right, I
have
was
a
curious
cohort.
if you'll
yeah.
ebb and flow it
Yeah.
depending on who you
Yeah.
got.
So right now, I foresee this for this particular group of students, because there's 6 altogether. In the next 2 years, we would use the model we use now, which with one student, it's manageable to work through the challenges, because it's things like, oh, we forgot to load them in the tech system. But when you have 6 kids that they forget to load, it's a lot harder to solve those problems than when there's one student. So with a group of 6, some of those challenges just logistically with the days off and the institute days, we make it work when we have one and it's easier. So on the days when they don't have school and the child is here, they work in one-on-one in the library learning center, and they have Mrs. Maroney in there or another adult that sometimes Mrs. Dauchus will even be available, or whoever's available to support the student if they need something related to math while they're doing some independent work. But if we could offer it on campus and have them be part of our community and still get them matriculating to the right course
Right.
when they get to RB, we feel like this would be the right thing to do for this large of a group.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see any reason why you would want to, if they're capable and
Yeah.
understand the content, why you would not move them forward.
Yeah, and
No, I think it's great that you support even just the one student that's doing it now.
Right.
I mean, that's a.
we'll always do that.
Yeah, that's a.
So it's just, with the FTE, because we could do it, because we have, like, we'd have to cut off one period of math, it works.
And then when you say reasonable class size for the others, it would be similar to what we have now?
Similar to what we have now, yeah. Maybe even a little bit lower, depending on the way the schedule's fleshed out.
Any questions about that? That's interesting. It's exciting too. Yeah.
Okay. So generally support for that?
Yeah.
I want to communicate back to the parents if we have that.
Definitely.
Okay.
Well, yeah, we don't want them to be stuck,
Right,
you know.
yeah, limbo. Yeah.
Rather keep them
Okay.
here.
Single variable problems their whole life.
That's right. Okay, so we're going to move on to a science update, and I'm going to bring Kelly King up to talk through this with me on science. So as you know, you can come on.
Just talk up there, because I'll be clicking through
Sure.
our resources. I want to make sure I'm able to talk to you instead of like my back to you while I'm clicking through our resource we're going to talk about.
Okay, so as you know, we've been piloting and doing some implementation at K through 5 with the next generation science standards. So on this first slide are listed all the units we presented earlier to you in terms of what we've been piloting. And the
I'm co-teaching in the 1st and 3rd grade unit, and I just have to say, I know we presented on to at the beginning of the year on how they were going, and obviously we had just kicked it off. And now that we're into the 3rd trimester, it's just been an amazing experience. We'll talk a little bit more about how we've really tried to make them interdisciplinary, weaving in some of those measurement and data standards as far as math goes, really all of our next generation science standards, and then even our ReadyGen ELA standards as well, because like Meryl said earlier, our ReadyGen really ties so nicely to science and social studies. But just to see, I'm actually currently working in 1st grade right now. We're kind of finishing up, but it's just amazing the level of questioning that even students that are 6 and 7 years old are able to come up with. The depth of knowledge, because they're doing so much of the generating of questions, it's not just cut and dry. And then the things that they're producing as far as the engineering has just been amazing. We're doing prototypes with hard materials right now, like cardboard and things like that, but even the things they've been able to generate have been really impressive.
Yep. So Kelly was really intentional when she worked on designing the units with the teachers to make sure the design and modeling component sort of drove the inquiry of where we were headed. So in grade 1, the measurement and data standards are fully woven into that unit. Same at grade 3. At grade 4, they also have some operations and algebraic thinking, as well as numbers and operations, as well as the measurement and data standards embedded in their units. And then at grade 5, measurement and data again, of course, and then geometry and numbers and operations. So there are lots of math concepts woven into these integrated science units. And again, based on our ELA curriculum, we've also connected back to that as well. So they're really, truly interdisciplinary in nature, which has been nice. Continuing this work, our plan is this summer, we actually have all teachers identified that are willing to continue to work on the development. And so we would be developing the K units and the grade 2 units, and then the remaining units in grades 1, 4, and 5. And actually, Erin Depke, who was also our math interventionist now, but also served on the science committee and had the foundational training, is going to be working with Kelly along with Lauren Allen. So those will be the 3 D96 staff members that sort of facilitate this process. So we're able to use all that training we've done, now be able to use our own internal people to carry the work forward. So they're going to be doing a deep dive training with K through 5 in summer and in fall, like we had done with reading and math, capture everyone in June that we can, which right now it looks like we can capture about 70% of the people, and then catch the other 30% at the beginning of the school year in the standards training, and then write the units that we still need to write this summer, and then next year, roll out the pilot units to all the classrooms, the ones that we're piloting this year, and then have the committee pilot the new units that are developed this summer, and then the following year, if ready, which we think we will be, but determine the readiness for rollout, and then in 2021 we'll be fully implemented for the elementary science standards. So with that, Kelly and I have been exploring together a way to make the curriculum really accessible for all our teachers. Even though we're designing these units, there's a lot of components involved and a lot of organization of instructional activities and assessments and monitoring progress. And so we've been using this resource called Define STEM supplementally with our advanced learning team, as well as in the building of our current pilot units. So I'm going to let Kelly take it from here and talk a little more about this resource and how we see it supporting our teacher developed
So Define
units.
STEM is students, it's all project-based learning, interdisciplinary units built within. And so when we were writing the 3rd grade and then 1st grade units last summer, we used Define STEM for the science phenomena. That's what the next generation science standards. All science units should begin with some type of phenomena that engages the students in those questioning processes. So you'll see an example of that. And then there are students take on the role of a certain career to kind of put them in the shoes of a backpack designer or a city planner or an engineer. And then they can complete different tasks, whether those be reading and writing tasks. And then we built in the engineering component as well. And what we're really excited about Define STEM for the future is they're building in now where you can customize their units to fit your needs. So when writing the whole year of 3rd grade units, we used some of Define STEM materials, but we felt like they didn't have enough of the engineering practices, so we wrote those in. We have supplemental text from our Ready Gen curriculum, we have supplemental math work from our Math and Focus work, but now Define STEM is offering the opportunity to be able to create a custom hub where all of our units will live, and that the best part is that teachers and students would now be able to access. So right now we're just using this as a teacher resource for kind of planning and, like Meryl said, for advanced learning. But moving forward, the Define STEM has where students can complete and turn in their work online into an online portfolio. And then I'll click you through in a second kind of the power of the portfolio. So they're able to be assessed in 21st century skills, in the next generation science standards, in the math standards and ELA standards that are worked on in the unit, and then it builds out that portfolio over time. So if we're doing these units K-5, you'll now be able to see a time of growth and then how many of these skills have been covered K-5. And we would use these again for our science inquiry-based units, but seeing how many other standards we've worked through in that hub. And then all of the products that the students have created, whether sometimes they use Google Drawings to make models of things or photos of something physical that they've actually built, that's all uploaded in there as well. And it creates kind of that common assessment piece too, that teachers will be able to score on a rubric. And for right now, we don't really have much as far as science assessment in the classroom, but this kind of gives teachers another way to assess on a common level in the science classroom.
And Define STEM from a technology standpoint has already been vetted for student and teacher use. We're already using it with our advanced learning team, and it meets our privacy standards, so just to add that in there.
So I'll go ahead and walk you through the resource. So this is what kind of all the projects are set up. So this is an actual unit that we actually do in 3rd grade. We're starting it now in the 3rd trimester, reducing the impact of severe weather. And it goes perfectly along with one of the modules in ReadyGen. So this is one of those ones that mirrors perfectly to our ELA curriculum. So students are introduced to this video, which is kind of their phenomenon. And then there's the guiding questions that teachers can lead the students to if they don't come to them on their own. Again, inquiry is all about the students driving the questioning process. And then there's steps for students to build background knowledge. Meryl mentioned before, we do have some students that sometimes struggle in these type of sub areas because they may not have background or exposure to some of these things. So Define STEM provides all of that within their hub. And then students do research, and then they work on the different types of projects. So what you're seeing is it looks very similar from the teacher side and the student side. There's not a big level of difference, which also makes the learning curve a lot easier for teachers, because then when teachers model for the students, when their screen looks very similar to the student screen, we've learned just doing the technology modeling in classrooms that's extremely helpful as well. So that's kind of the overview of the platform itself. And then the part that we really like the best is this portfolio and projects manager. So you'll see we have a sample student in here, and I can go ahead and look at him in my new tab. And so in this product he created, so this would be his science modeling standards of transfer of energy in the environment, energy solutions, and then his model. So he's received these scores on this assessment. And then I can save and continue. And then I can look at his math standards that are assessed in this unit as well. So we're able to input what math standards are being taught in this unit, and then we're able to give them on a rubric scale the math scores. And then we're also able to look at our NGSS standards and what has been scored on there as well. And then you can see, especially for NGSS, we have our physical science bundles, and then the cross-cutting concepts which go across the life science, and physical science. So having this hub for teachers, obviously doing the co-teaching now in 3rd grade has really given me a good background on this, but then this product is, I think, easy enough for all teachers to be able to use with professional development as we move forward with rolling out these units, and hopefully by 2021 being able to fully implement all K-5 and GSS units in the classroom.
So if you flip,
Does the teacher choose an activity based on the standards, reverse?
Yes, great question. So you can.
Because I think that would be very valuable.
Yeah, that's a great question.
actually, we should, I wonder if you could get it.
Yeah, so we can search.
It's got, while Kelly's searching, it's got projects and activities aligned to NGSS,
Yeah.
math, ELA, across the board. So yeah, you can see there's literacy tasks.
Would we need to design something if you knew that you wanted to,
Right.
accomplish, providing evidence for a claim and something
Correct.
about,
You can do it
fluoridation
by
and an ELA
standards.
Yeah.
content?
So here I can filter by standards K-12.
Yeah.
And then I can look at whatever strain of standards, like Meryl was saying, that I'm looking for. So I can look at the current social studies elementary learning standards. I can look at all of the Common Core for math and ELA. And then I can also do the next generation science.
Will it tie it to one of these activities?
It'll tie it back to not our science activity, but it'll tie it to
No.
additional activities in the hub.
I understand that. It would be interesting to see if we could tie it to the STEM activities that they're working on, like the meteorologist report or something, where you could, work backwards.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we did, because we used this as kind of our launching point for our
Yeah.
current unit, and I think in developing the future units, we would use their resources that they've created
Yeah.
as that same thing. And then what's nice about that is we can take, like exactly like you're saying, the ones they've already developed, and then we can add in the pieces
Yeah,
that
before
we
you
know.
spend a lot of time designing.
Right.
I mean, that's a lot of teacher
Reinventing the
time.
wheel.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
So now that they have this, they actually added social studies this past fall.
Yeah.
It just showed
It's
up.
really nice because
Yeah.
usually you have to go and look at them separately and it takes forever.
Yeah.
So this is a much more efficient
Yeah.
way to develop it. So it just turned out, it's kind of like the perfect storm, right? We've been working on this pilot implementation. At the same time, they've been developing this to be a proprietary hub, which was our concern before too, because when we're loading things from ReadyGen or Math and Focus, there's a proprietary issue. We can't put that out in an open resource because it's a purchased product. So we would have to have a proprietary hub in order to load an interdisciplinary approach. So they've now allowed for that, which they didn't used to allow. Everything you loaded was open. Now you can have it be proprietary. And then also within there, we have the power to upload whatever resources we wanted. So that all happened, and at the same time, we had grant money that you get additional allocations in January from after the government figures out everything that they need to do, as well as a little bit of rollover money that we had. So it turned out that at the same time that the grant money got reallocated, we were looking at this and we thought, oh, if the board supports this, we could actually pay for 3 years of the use of this curriculum hub with current fiscal year dollars from the grant this year in FY19, and then from FY22 and out, we would be able to program for it in the regular science budget, which we actually have that. We would have that ability if we didn't have grant money, but there is an opportunity to grant fund the initial 3 years right now if we choose to support this.
And they're always like 3-year cycle.
Well, we did it, we're recommending a 3-year cycle because we got to build out our units over the next 2 for sure.
Okay.
Implement the full amount of units, and then we also got a discount for doing a 3-year
Right.
license.
With the plan B, is this just for science, or could you potentially use this for the other subjects?
So it would be our core hub for science, and it can be used supplementally for other subjects. So like in ReadyGen, so that's what I wrote in there, like for enrichment in ReadyGen, we talk about that a lot. If we have a student who needs to take a project further, there's the opportunity to take the standards that they're working on in ReadyGen, input them in here, and identify an inquiry task or activity that could stretch their learning in that way, so that we could take standards forward in here. So it could be supplemental for other content, but our core hub for science.
Do you have other proprietary software like this for the other subjects, or is it only for this?
No, nothing like this.
I mean, I'm just thinking that you wouldn't want to have 5 different systems,
Yeah,
right?
no, we
You'd
don't.
want to have one system.
We have like, what happens with Math and Focus is we just have a hub, like an online hub where teacher resources are, but the kids are not accessing. You can issue some online assessments through it, but it's not a robust student user online platform. And with our ELA, same thing. It's online assessments and online texts are there, but nothing that the kids are interacting with it in this way. They're more supplemental.
And I think that's building progress over time. I think that's the other piece. So when the students, like, let's say, might be doing online assessments in ReadyGen, it's not the next class's teacher is not necessarily seeing that data from 3rd grade.
Right,
And
it
the
doesn't
student
carry.
4th grade, it just kind of restarts as they restart the class. Whereas this, because it's interdisciplinary and we can embed some of the other, like the social studies, math, and ELA standards, I think that you're going to be able to see that growth over time. So this will live in one place.
So could you, in principle, could you use this for like English or something like that? Say like, just forget about the fact that there's already some science modules and say, I'm gonna do exactly the same thing.
We could upload our common assessments and then put it in that hub.
And then the nice part to it is because our ELA is so close to science, then some of the tasks, so for example, like the weather unit I talked about for science is their ReadyGen unit, so their PBA, which is their big writing at the end, could easily go in here and be their uploaded in here because it already ties to their ELA and then what they're doing in science, because we've been able to nicely find those topics.
And Define STEM would allow us to load our rubrics to score our performance-based assessments from our ELA curriculum. So then the scoring, like the product might still be on paper, but the scoring mechanism could be placed in the hub.
Does this
for
allow you to
tracking.
interface with graphical analysis or data tools? I know that some of them are young kids, but they can learn to analyze data. 'Cause I think
Yes.
graphing trends is such a hard thing to teach until you get to high school. And we always say, boy, I wish we would have taught that earlier. And it seems like a neat interface that you could put in and have them analyze data.
See, in his portfolio, Because this is a sample student, it would look obviously with data in there.
Yeah.
But yes, then you get the pie chart analysis of the career cluster, because like I said, they take on the role of a person in the career for the project. And then, again, because it's a sample, this is not loaded with
No, I mean
real
like
data.
specifics to the meteorology report, like could they be looking at charts
Oh, yeah,
with
they have
actual scientific
activities
data?
where they analyze that
Where we
stuff,
teach
yeah.
them how to read?
Yeah, and actually in the weather unit
trends?
we wrote, there are graphs, they're going to be analyzing real weather graphs that
Right.
we took as a resource.
Right, I just think that would be, it
Yeah.
just seems kind of a natural place, and I don't know about the compatibility, but
Yeah, so that's actually
it's something I
already-
wish like I could have done, with the older kids even. It'd be
Yeah,
fun.
that's actually in our, it's funny you brought that up because we're starting that soon, and that's actually in our NDSS unit for your
Oh, trends are really.
So we'll
yeah.
upload it into this Define STEM Hub as well,
Right.
because it's a learning activity students
Right.
can participate in.
Right.
Right now, they just created a mock for us, like.
Oh, sure. No, I get it,
but
yeah.
We thought we could show you a demo. before
No,
we
that's great.
whole committed. So what, if you go back to my PowerPoint, Cal.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. So in looking at sort of that cost factor, what we were able to do was to bundle. So we were able to bundle Central and Hollywood as a single campus and Ames and Blythe as a single campus purchase, which is really nice for us because rather than paying for 4 sites, we can pay for 2 because of our small schools. And then we also got a discount of $3,000 for the 3 years. So normally that would be $12,000, where we would be paying $9,000 per year. And we would be able to pay that full 3-year cost up front via grant dollars to be able to launch this. And so that would be our recommendation, and we would bring it to you at the April, or at the March board meeting if the board, if there's a sense that this would be a worthwhile tool for us to be able to build our hub.
When you say it's absorbed into the science budget, would you be replacing something else, or is it just?
No, because right now, what we had when we had the FOSS kit budget, we had a robust $12,000 budget per year.
Yeah.
And I've been able to reduce the supply kit expenditures by managing it centrally. So the supply kits, we have not spent more than $3,000 a year on right
Okay.
now. And so between the two, we're able to still refill our kits plus maintain the software.
Yeah, 12,000 seems like plenty.
Yeah, so we still have, so actually there will probably be not as many expenditures in the science budget over the next 3 years, although I would hold the amount and just not
Yeah, no, that
spend
makes
it.
sense.
Because we will have purchased the 3 years up front through the grant. So you won't see that $9,000 being expended in the science supply line. In the science budget, we'd spend more like $3,000 for the next 3 years for the kit refills.
Any questions from Ms. Brown?
How, when you talked about the licenses, how big, how many kids can you serve classrooms?
Site license, unlimited.
So how are we able to
So.
call?
It's a school site license, so however many
Right.
students you have in your enrollment for those sites, that's who you can put into the
So
system.
because our schools are small, we can bundle 2 of
We
them?
bundled the two, right, because they charge a school site license is the same whether you have 400 kids or 600 kids or 100. So I negotiated like any curriculum person would do and said, well, when I have buildings of 100, less than 200,
Okay.
can we bundle so
Yeah.
so that's why rather than, it would normally be $3,000 per site,
Right.
we got $3,000 knocked off of the total cost to bundle the schools. So,
Yeah, I wonder,
it's my business.
No, I'm just thinking the education return on investment to this compared to the education return on investment, so the next topic we'll be talking about are, I mean, incomparable, I think. It's like, right, to be a huge return, I mean, for the modest cost, we'll presumably have a large
Yeah,
return.
well, this is one of those
Well, and the
resources.
pilots are appreciated, so we actually know how it
Right.
functions. I think, yeah, I'd still think piloting and keeping track of the pilot.
Keep making
is
sure that
really
it's successful.
important
Yeah.
But this
for
seems
us.
totally
yeah.
sensible, seems
Yeah,
very
no, it
sensible to me.
seems great, as long as you think it's functional and.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, and
It really hasn't. I totally agree with you with doing the pilot. I mean, we've made pivots even in this first year of piloting, which has really helped before we develop
Yeah.
the units.
Yeah.
And then, again, as defined STEM evolves with having this component, and we were already using it, it's such a natural fit, and just the level of things I think we'll be able to include.
It's been great because we've been pushing them a little bit, because when we first found the resource, we saw the potential in it, but it wasn't doing everything we wanted it to be able to do, to say, like, let's buy it for everyone. So we've sort of been pushing, especially around the proprietary piece, because we knew from an interdisciplinary standpoint we wanted to load our own resources. And that was one of the things in the beginning that we couldn't do because it was going to be open ed. So now that they've managed to figure that out, so we've been supplementing with them for advanced for the last 2 years. So it's been a nice evolution to kind of see where they landed. So I feel good about that. Okay. Thank you, Ms. King, for being my sidekick. Okay, so last topic on the agenda has to do with our English learners and bilingual students. And there are some efficiencies and levels of service that we've provided, and then there's state minimums around which you service these students. And we recommended last year the reduction of 0.5 in services because we actually exited so many children in our program, which was wonderful and a great thing. And then a few more actually moved as well. So in total, 33 students came off the caseload, and you saw that in the memo and the chart. Since that time, we have gained back 22 of the 33 students. So we're back up at 89 students right now.
When you say gain back, you mean new?
New students to our district, not the students we had. No, I'm sorry. Thank you, Martha. Students moved in. We had new students arrive to our district requiring English language services. And so we're back up at a caseload of 89 students. And there's a lot of complexities around how we service English language learners and bilingual students. Bilingual programming is mandated and different from English language learner support. So we have two programs running concurrently. As soon as you have 20 students in an attendance center speaking it the same language, you must offer a bilingual program in that language, in that school. So right now, Ames and Central both are mandated to have bilingual programs. What gets complicated, that I want to make simple, is that not every EL student who speaks Spanish qualifies for the bilingual services, because you have to be at a certain score on the access test, which is the screener, to be qualifying for particular levels of service. So the screener determines which program you are entered into, whether it's bilingual or whether it's English learner support. But the numbers dictate the programming. So it gets a little tricky. In any case, we grew by the 22 students, and in order to make sure that the levels of service are being offered at the minimum, even the minimum level that's recommended, so a moderate student must have a minimum of 150 minutes per week of services, and a student who is struggling is recommended to have between that and 300 minutes a week, depending on where they fall out on their access scores. And those are recommendations. There's no hard, fast guideline. The 150 minutes is the hard, fast guideline per student per week. That's, if you're not programming for them at that minimum level, then you will get cited if a student falls into the moderate or higher category. So with all of our programming, the reason we've been able to exit so many students is we have been providing optimal levels of service that have really helped these students to close their gaps. And given our curriculum expectations, oftentimes a second language learner who comes in at the lower level, so on their screener, if they're below a 4.8 composite score, 6 is the highest, they are considered at a much higher risk. And then 4.8 to 5 is like they're transitioning, and when they get above 5, that's when they say, okay, you're ready to be gen ed. So in order to close those gaps and have our students grow, we've been programming to support those needs and been able to exit a lot of students. Now that we're back up to 89 and working with the staff that we have teachers traveling to 2 and 3 buildings to meet needs. Hauser gets a little tricky. That is where we've had the largest amount of growth. We've had 14 students in the last 3 years enter Hauser. When I first started at Hauser, we had one that required EL instruction. We now have 14. Several of those students have been newcomers. So when you're programming at Hauser for a newcomer, you can only program in a 40-minute block to deliver those services. And so I need one of the bilingual teachers who's speaking Spanish, even though they're not required to offer a bilingual program, the students don't speak English. So I need one of my Spanish-speaking EL teachers to be able to go to Hauser to service those students in a 40-minute block. So when you're going between Hauser and an elementary schedule and then trying to service the kids that need the services in the second languages, it becomes very complicated. And our staff is pretty stretched. We're making it work. We have one teacher leaving Ames every day at 2 o'clock to go to Central for the last block of the day because the Central teacher is teaching at Hauser the students that need the Spanish. So it becomes like a little domino effect in terms of rearranging people. And with our contract having 30 minutes of travel time, we need to also be sensitive to how we're blocking those schedules to make sure we're not losing instructional time by sending teachers back and forth during the school day. So we are really pretty stretched at this point around trying to provide EL support. On top of that, the state added a mandate that you now monitor students who have exited for up to 4 years after they've exited the program. It used to be just 2. So that progress monitoring has to happen on a regular basis, on an every other week basis during the school day in order to make sure that we're tracking their progress once exited. So that mandate got layered in.
Weekly monitoring?
We do it biweekly. We do it every other week. Yeah. So we had that mandate happen at the same time that we got these students back, that we also cut staff. So they've been working really, really hard. Some of them have been working through plan times and getting, doing a timesheet if we've needed it. Our part-time teacher has actually been timesheeting to do some of the progress monitoring and administration of the access assessment when we were trying to administer that. So we've been juggling with the staff that we have to make it work. So in looking at the overall Hauser FTE for next year, we are going to be able, and I confirmed this, we just met this week, we confirmed that we are going to be able to reduce some of the FTE at Hauser. So this 0.5 that we're recommending being added back would primarily be dedicated to Hauser so that we can keep our elementary people at the elementary buildings and make this program work efficiently again. And it would not be new FTE given we're going to reduce Spanish sections.
Where does that come from?
Spanish.
Yeah.
So we're able to bump up the class sizes slightly in Spanish because of the lower class, overall class sizes, to reduce the amount of sections in Spanish and then kind of offset the FTE for EL bilingual. So that's where it comes from in the end when I explain it all. Right now, we have a Spanish teacher at Hauser teaching 0.2, 2 sections of EL students, and then a central teacher teaching the other 0.3 at Hauser, so they're tag teaming. So the Spanish teacher that's teaching the EL would go back to picking up Spanish, and the other person teaching Spanish is, we're going to move things around a bit so that we can create the FTE so that it wouldn't be a layering of new FTE. So there will be an overall reduction in FTE in Hauser even with this 0.5 addition. We think we're going to be able to reduce by 0.5 in total.
Is that due to the enrollment trend or just because of interest
partial
in
enrollment
Spanish?
and so for example, Lynn Janik, who also is Spanish certified, will pick up Spanish next year.
Yeah.
So when I say we rearrange some of the Spanish.
Yeah, I was going to ask if we had any multiple certified people that we could tap into.
So we're playing chess with everybody, and we haven't finalized any allocations, but Lynn is aware that we've had that conversation, so I feel fine saying that out loud. But so when we finalize things, at the end, it won't be an additional FTE, it will be a absorbed FTE. With actually an overall reduction of 0.5 is where we're at right now.
So they wouldn't be teaching during their plan or anything like that? It would be part of their regular
It would just be
schedule?
part of their
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, and there's some other things happening that are not public yet in terms of staffing moves that we're making, so that by the end, it will be a reduction of 0.5 in the end.
When the state changed their monitoring window, you said it was 2 years to 4 years?
It used to be 2 years after I said, now it's 4.
Did they provide any additional money for us to do that?
In fact, they took our money away because we don't have 100 students.
Did you expect
So in order to get funding through Title III, you have to have 100 students.
Right.
So we don't get the Title III funding at all. We had it my first 2 years. Now we're just under. We missed by 13 kids. So we don't get that funding. I did do some of the programming for EL in the Title I grant, because you can now fund EL through your Title I grant. So I did move some of the Title III funding that we were using into Title I this year to absorb it there. But yeah, no, they don't, yeah.
And that's their number, 100 is their?
Is their cut threshold.
Number?
Yeah.
Does that monitoring, I assume, continue into high school?
As long as a kid is wherever they've exited in the program in the K-12 system. But the high school would have to pick it up. We don't
Right,
pick up.
no, I
yeah.
get that,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
they have a responsibility
Correct.
to these
Yes,
kids
that's a
to
good
make
question.
sure that
Correct.
they're,
Correct.
I'm just going to leave them.
I mean, it's a mandate for all K-12.
It makes sense that they would pick it up.
Yeah.
So that's the rationale. So you'll see that recommendation if you have questions between now and the March board meeting.
Do
Happy
you
to.
anticipate your numbers of kids to change at all?
Pardon me?
Do you anticipate the numbers for the kids to change?
Well, I projected conservatively based on our trends that I saw. I mean, last year was the first year where we started so low, but
Yeah.
then we've had so many people move in. And the move-in rates, they happened sooner the year before, and we got a large number of kindergartners. I think the little people that are coming up right now, and we have, I think it's 8 students in pre-K that are also EL learners right now in our pre-K program that are coming up. So I could be off by 1 or 2, but there's a robust number that Jenny Rehor from Blythe Park, our EL teacher, she services the early childhood EL learners also.
Okay.
So consults with those teachers. And Michelle Rickelman is certified as an EL instructor as well. So between the two of them, we cover our early learners.
Any questions, or you good? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We'll pass it on to Mr. Hunt.
Thanks very much.
No, sorry, not
Regan,
Mr.
actually.
Hunt. You're last, sorry. To Rich Regan for finance.
Thanks,
You need
Sherry.
to skip Rich.
So we're going to continue our conversation about projects and finance. And in the time since we last met, Mr. Fitton and Martha have been working on a couple of options to consider. And I'm going to ask Jim to come up and walk us through some of those options.
Great, thanks. I want to talk through some options for funding the capital project plan that was recommended by the Facility Advisory Committee. So I'll start with some slides you saw last time. This is the estimates that were provided by our owner's rep, Ramesh Nair of Vistara. The number on the top right there is total for the Ames project at $11.6 million. So this is kind of broken up into 2 tables. The bottom table has a little more of the detail. If you look all the way to the right, those are the totals of all the projects that we had him do cost estimates on. The total of those projects is $21.98 million. And then there's a summary table up at the top, so that number comes up to the top. That's the budget for all these projects. And then he used a contingency on the total program, all the projects together. So the projects that we had him put together estimates on total up to $23.1 million. And I bring that over into our projections. And we've got some placeholders for a few other projects on here, replace playground equipment and separate parking and play at Central and Hollywood. So our complete capital project plan is $24.4 million. We had $2 million at the start of the year already in that fund. And to get to 24.4, we would need to figure out how we'll fund the other 22.4 million. So this is all things we talked about last meeting. And options for how do we come up with that 22.4 million. We devised 4 different tools to talk about tonight that would help with the funding. And the solution's going to be a mix of these probably. And I'll just start with one example, follow it through and to explain it. So for instance, the first tool there, if we pay for some of it from the current operating fund balance, we use $15 million as an example. So what does that do to our projections? The red line here is our fund balance and our projected fund balances. The lower blue line is the 40% That's our policy for fund balance. And then I put a 55% line. That's the second, the higher blue line, which comes out of kind of the guidelines that people were discussing last month. So in the first box, at the end of this year, that's FY19, we show 20.4 million above the 40% policy and 16 million over the 55%. And then the second box, the one all the way to the right, is where we would end up 10 years from now based on our projections. So at the end of FY29, we show still in excess of 12.6 million over the 40% and 7.3 million over the 55%. So that's without taking any money out and moving it over for capital projects. And if you see how the red line starts curving down, that's in the last 6 years, we're projecting deficit, which would eat into our fund balance.
Could you explain the transfer of the 47 million and 0.6 million?
Yeah. So I put those boxes on so that you know we've accounted for, that we already have some debt that we have to pay off over the next few years. And when I say that there's no new transfers to capital funds, those transfers would happen because we owe the money. So it would come out of operating, moved into debt as the debt becomes due. So if we transfer 15 million over to capital projects, of course the red line drops down significantly this year, right about 60%. And then if we start that with that fund balance next year and take the projections out 10 years, in FY29 we'd end up at 33% of fund balance or 11.9 million. So you can see the red line dips below the 40% in our policy. So hold that thought and we'll go on to the second tool, which we have reduced operating fund projected expenditures. So especially in those last 6 years when we project going into fund balance. So I'm going to go back up this slide before any transfers. These are our projections. And the last 6 years eat into our fund balance about $4.5 million. And just to dig in on the surpluses for a second and the deficits, the last 10 years we averaged $4.5 million surplus. So we were adding to fund balance on average that amount each of the last 10 years. Some more, some less. But the projections go the other way. Going out 10 years, we're looking at average deficits of $340,000. And when you total those 2 decades up, it was about 45 million we added to fund balance in the past, and we're looking at using up about 4.5 million. So if we're able to reduce those projected expenditures out in these 10 years ahead, what I calculated, if we reduce our projected expenditures by 1.4%, we could basically flatten that red line out. We would have the same fund balance at the end of FY19 and FY29. So I changed the graph to show, again, this is without transferring. It's kind of obvious since it doesn't dip way down, but we would have 31.4 million at the end of this year and target to be at 31.4 million at the end of 10 years out, so FY29. All right, so now with those expenditures, with a balanced budget all 10 years, the line doesn't curve down anymore, it's more flat. We end up where we started. And if we transfer 15 million, there's some ups and downs in there, but we end the FY29 with 46.7%, which is more comfortable than 33%, and it's above our policy.
Jim, do you want to, before you move on, do you want to comment about how you suggest we may reduce operating fund expenditures by that amount?
Well,
And why the 1.4? I'm just curious, because it's very specific.
I guess I would set it as a goal that we don't have a budget where we expect to go in the whole year.
Right.
So did you pick a number, or did you take a look and make that as a
went both
suggestion?
ways. I thought it was reasonable to be between 1% and 2%, and so I thought, well, what is that worth? And you could see from that one bar graph that it's $4.5 million over 10 years. So how do we not spend that $4.5 million that you can fund them? So yeah, when I figured out it was 1.4%, I thought, well, that's
Gotcha.
possible.
Okay. I do think it's an important exercise just to show to the board that even a little bit of a reduction.
I mean, it's a lot of money.
1.4% on our budget really means a great deal to what we're talking about.
Sure.
Yeah.
It does, although the curve still trends downward.
Still trends.
Towards the outlying years.
It pushes it further out though.
Yes.
All right, sorry about the interruption.
So that if those were the two choices we made with A and B, that leaves a shortfall on the projects of $7.2 million. And the one that's at our disposal is to reduce the scope of the projects or postpone $7.2 million of it until we know how we would pay for it. Maybe we have better years and we add 7.2 to fund balance, and we can use that. It's not projected, but if we put that portion of the projects, postpone it a year, maybe two, get more information. And then one last tool is to ask the property owners to contribute more through their property taxes. So I'll just going through these tools here. We could pay quite a bit out of fund balance, and that doesn't require a referendum. We just transfer it. It takes board action to transfer it. We reduce what we're spending in operating funds so that we get rid of those deficits, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. So that would be over the 10 years, but we could also borrow against that too, which means if we're going to pay it out of operating, we still have to make cuts, but we also have to make more cuts to pay for the fees and the interest that goes along with it. So those other two aren't really recommended in our situation. It's more for a district that knows they're going to have surpluses, and they want that money now, so they're borrowing against where they know it's going to come back in.
Yeah.
Of course, we can, well, what I showed was reducing our fund balance to 60% now, and then postponing the rest of the project, so we'd have to prioritize. And so the raising more tax revenue, there's a couple ways to look at this. There's with the usual way to do this, the way the system's set up, is that you would issue building bonds to pay for your buildings and then pay them off over 20 years. It's expensive, but it's kind of how it's done. People don't usually save so much in operating that they can pay for them out of that. So there's building bonds, and then there's other bonds that we could, I call general obligation limited tax bonds, and we could issue those, but I think they have to be paid back in a shorter period of time, which saves on the extra costs. But there's a couple options on bonds. And then the options at the bottom are to raise taxes. And there's a couple ways you can do it: through increasing the limiting rate or the extension. And what we could do is take that 7.2 million and figure out if we needed it over 5 years to kind of replenish, we could pay out of fund balance and then replenish if the referendum were to pass. And the thing with increasing the taxes, it stays in there. So a future board could say, after we get that 7.2 million over the 5 years, either say, we have more projects and we want to keep our operating rate where it is, or they could deliberately reduce it by that amount so that it's 5 years and then stops. We've funded our project. That's really the cheapest way to get money. There wouldn't be interest and fees with that. All right, any questions?
I have a really basic question, and I'm probably just missing it somewhere. So we're talking about the 24.4 million. My question is basically, where's the 7.2 million number come from?
That's the 22.4 that we need because there's already 2 in there. So take that out, we need 22.4 to fully fund everything
Okay.
that's on that list. And if we transferred 15, then maybe you save 12, whatever we don't transfer over is the remainder.
Okay, so that's not including option tool B then?
No, that's just.
Okay, that's where I was.
You kind of need an example, I
Okay.
to follow it through.
Okay, I was doing it additively, so I was thinking this, and then I was wondering why the 7.2, but that totally makes sense now. Thank you.
If we transfer 12.4, then we need to get 10 million somehow, and maybe that's cut 5, ask for 5.
Right. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Sure.
I think under the title of due diligence, I think this is definitely the right exercise for the board to consider, that, now that we've seen all of these possible projects, these are ways that we can tackle them to pay for them. So I think this is a good time to start firing questions at Jim for anything we don't understand here.
Can you remind me, I think you talked about the CPI trend a couple of meetings ago, but it seems like it's going to stay on a nearly positive trend. Is that correct? Near 2 for CPI in the future? I know it's a guess, but...
Well, I always use 2% for CPI.
Yeah. Because, we've been at 0.8, we've been at different places, so it's always hard to know, but are there any assumptions about CPI in these charts, or is it?
In the projections?
Yes.
Have
you chosen 2?
2%.
Okay, thanks.
I think that's a really good point, though, because, what Jim has presented here is a projection over a very extended period, and that there are a host of factors that can blow this thing apart. But this is the best we can do at this stage of it, is sort of, sort of project out what we think it may be.
Right.
There could be a dip in enrollment. There could be a spike in enrollment. There could be any number of factors that change this picture for us.
Yeah, I just want to know if you used any assumptions when you came up with your chart.
I'd say very safe with every time they had.
Conservative choices, yeah, okay.
Sometimes it's helpful to break the problem down a little bit. I mean, it's very hard to, as Rich just said, to think about a 10-year horizon, to think about all the things that might happen, to think about all the funding options, to think about all the projects that we have talked about, to think about all the other uses of our money. It's very hard to wrap your head around to that and come up with a decision like right now about all of that. But maybe what might be worthwhile is to sort of try to decide what is really, in the scheme of things, in the context of this master facility plan, what are the key pieces that we really need to move on in the short term, and how do we want to pay for those, or what kind of budget do we want to set for those things. And then once that's all rolling and in place, we have plenty of time, and the other boards, over the next 10 years, they can sort of fill in the pieces as we go. I mean, so maybe that's the
That's a good point, Jeff, and I think this is time to mention that, and partially this is directed at Bob, is we do not have a 24.4 program yet. We have a number of good ideas on what a program could be. And we're going to be here and we're going to decide what this actual capital program is going to look like. There's not a program that we're taking away from yet. We are still defining exactly what our priorities are. What schools and what overall district needs are we trying to address? And we're still, I mean, the advantage is that we have all these numbers in front of us, but we do need to prioritize, because we could say that we want to buy all of Riverside and make it a District 96 campus. Lots of green space, great. But
Should we take a raise of hands on that concept?
Dramatically reduce enrollment.
There we go. So it's a
There's that's what he said for it, that's right.
Thank you. Thank you for humor. But we need to prioritize and see where do we want to be with our projects, and where do we want to be with our budget, and where do those two coincide or compromise?
I think that's an excellent point, and I think, if I could take a stab at what I see as the key pieces here, not to say that nothing else is, I'm not saying that all the things we've talked about, that any of them are unimportant, but in terms of, I think, what sort of has to be done, that we really have to do, considering all of the work that's gone into the master facility plan, all the work the facilities committee has done, and the purchases, the real purchases we've already laid out, two properties at Ames and one at Harlem. The things that sort of the next steps I think that have to be done are, in addition at Ames, to execute the plan that the facilities committee has come up with to basically move the early learners to Ames, increase the space at Ames, move additional sections from Central to Blythe over time, and move the LADSI program from Hollywood to Central. All of that rotation, so every school benefits basically. That requires that the Ames expansion happen. Whether the size, the exact configuration, that it also needs to be worked out over the next 6 months. But I think that has to happen. And the other thing I think that has to happen is the central multi-purpose room or cafeteria. That was the whole purpose of buying that Harlem property, so we could have that multi-purpose room and decouple Hauser from Central. It doesn't really benefit Central so much, because Central right now they eat their lunch in the Hauser cafeteria. So now they're going to eat in the Central cafeteria. This is more of a wash for them, but it definitely helps Hauser, because their schedule now is all kind of like revolving around this crazy lunch.
10 o'clock.
So I think that those two things are sort of key. And then we can talk about other stuff that has to happen as well, but I think those sort of things, I think we have to get rolling on those. And again, the scope of that remains to be defined and all the rest, but to me, those are the two sort of key things we need to start on.
I agree with that suggestion, and I think it's, we're definitely at the point where we need to understand as a board where everybody stands on it. And while this shouldn't be a voting matter at this point, I think that it should be a straw poll, definitely, that who agrees with that prioritization that's just been suggested.
Well, I also am going to go back to what we discussed last time, is that we can prioritize, and I think it's very important that we prioritize, but we also have to come up with what are we comfortable with spending. I mean, obviously these projections are 10 years. We all know how things can change over 10 years. But we need to come up with a number that we're comfortable with spending for everything, because we could say we're doing Ames and we're doing Central, and that's it. And we'll say, hypothetically, let's say that costs $15 million, but we don't want to spend more than $15 million, so that leaves Blythe and Hollywood and out. So we have to, I say, in conjunction with not only prioritizing, we have to come up with how much are we willing to spend. And so are we comfortable with that $24 million? Or do we want to reduce that amount by $7.2 million? I mean, how much are we going to spend? And more specifically, how much are we going to spend for this? So, because I don't think we can have one discussion without the other.
which is kind of where I ended up, which is the plan and the money have to balance. And so I'm not interested in looking at any kind of tax increase for capital improvements. And that will restrict some of our spending because we're looking at long-term trends with CPI and really with the most important thing that we have, which are teachers, which is labor costs, which is on an upward trend. That's really the only reason we should be ever thinking about any kind of long-term tax rate increase. To get back to off that soapbox, I think Ames is absolutely our priority, and I still think we need to look at Hollywood and get the teachers off the stage.
I would say, to be fair, the only option, the only project that we've explored in a reasonable depth in my mind is Ames, and I don't think we're in a final situation on that to begin with. I mean, we just were presented one plan for Central and Hauser. Now, definitely, we've definitely, acquired property, and we want to look to move in that area. But I don't know that we could, if we're talking about we're setting numbers spent, I don't know that I trust that number just yet. I'm not sure that we're at that final number for Central and Hauser.
I should be clear about what I was saying for Central. I'm not saying adopt the Facilities Committee proposal for Central, which was extensive at $3.8 million. I was saying that we just have a bare minimum thing, which is take the central office or the district office, knock the walls down, that's your cafeteria. And then all the other good things that they talked about, we can do later. But that one simple step.
You mean immediately, like now? Let's start making the steps.
Now we can do that, and then once that's done, which is a simple operation, all the other stuff we research further, as you're suggesting. And we've got 10 years to implement this. This is a 10-year plan.
Well, Jeff, I'm going to disagree with you.
Yeah,
we don't have 10 years to implement.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Well, it is a 10-year plan. So
10-year projections for the finances.
Yeah.
But we don't have 10 years to fix Hollywood, to fix
The
Light, to
master
do
facility
Central.
plan is a 10-year plan. It's a 10-year plan from, that's it's in the title, I think, right? It's a 10-year master facility plan.
But I would agree with Dave, because I think the needs that were, outlined are needs that need, like.
I'm not saying wait till you're 9 to do other things. I'm just saying it doesn't have to happen next year for everything.
Right, and I guess the way I look at the 10-year plan is, the 10-year plan is what we're going to be spending, that's how much money we're going to be spending. So if we, and maybe that's not the right way to look at it, but I look at, well, if we spend like $24 million within the first 4 years, we're going to be paying it for the next 10 years. That's how I'm looking at this.
The point is well taken. I think I want to take Dan's point a little further in that we looked in great depth at Ames, but we did that for a reason. We did that because we realized that we needed to solve problems there that positively impacted other schools.
Right.
And we didn't spend enough time on all the other projects, but I feel like we're at risk at holding off on one big solution that we all agreed to while we're trying to figure out solutions to the other problems and additional options for the other problems. I really would suggest that we move ahead prudently with Ames and with a limited project at Central, at the same time look in more depth at the other projects and keep those other under further consideration. And Dave, as you suggested, tagging a number of those is a good idea. I think that's exactly what we should be doing.
I look at this and I see 15 million from our operating balance, and if it's feasible to, reduce the operating fund by 1.4% over the next 10 years, that's another 4.5 million. I feel like that's a very large sum of money that we can then allocate to the entire breadth of the projects, so that we know, like, okay, is the board comfortable with those numbers? We don't want to go out to to referendum. We're not interested in issuing debt. So if we're comfortable with that number, I feel like that's for me a good ballpark of, as we're proceeding with the first phase where we're starting Ames, maybe Central, that's kind of the number we're living in. Like, that to me feels comfortable. It doesn't cover the 24.2.
Right, but I guess,
but as we move through the project, that helps inform the decisions.
Right.
Like, maybe there's things we have to, obviously concepts we have to further explore and cut back on, or
Right. I guess that just sort of gives me, I agree with you that I agree with that we need to move forward with Ames. That to me is a no-brainer.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think we're all there.
My concern is that if we just sort of just look at the 15 million and the 4.5 million, that gives us $19.5 million. We're still $5 million short. I'm foreseeing that the other schools are going to get shafted, and
Well, I think it's,
not shafted, but
That's
they're not
assuming
going to
that, but that's assuming that number is what it would cost. We don't know
I
that.
think proposed in that plan to make life a full two-section school.
Right.
But it's still a bit unclear whether even our enrollment will necessitate a two-section school plan. We certainly could make it 1.5, and I think that would be, easily done with the surplus we have from Ames and Central. But it's unclear that we're going to have enough enrollment every single year to make it two full sections. So we might not even have to do anything at Blythe other than the entranceway. You know what I'm saying? So that was a big chunk of change right there. So I think that's something we still have to delve into a little bit deeper.
Right, but I guess my concern though is that if we do end up having to do two sections, we do have to do a lot of things at Hollywood, do more things at Central, that we're going to be heading, we're sort of kicking the can down the road by not sort of addressing where's that $7.2 million going to come from, or what was that number? Was it 7.2? Yeah, right.
But if you're including 4.5.
So I would like us to
4.5?
discuss that, because can we cut, I guess my question is, can we conceivably cut $7.2 million out of the scope of these processes?
Where to cut.
I think, and I probably spoke a little too quickly on implying that Hollywood required a large program, because the front office and moving classrooms around does open up space that would help out the stage situation. But I think to what Jeff said is, Rich, is Ames has a big effect on its own, but then it also has a district-wide effect in terms of moving various classrooms and spaces around. And we have not seen a really good analysis or look about all the shifting pieces and where they find a home after Ames is done. And really, I think that has to be a critical element to looking at what is realistically needed for the other schools. When you start talking about big build-outs or extra spaces that need to be built rather than repurposed.
I think that's a great point, Joel, and I think that's part of the ongoing process, that we're not going to be able to have those answers tonight, but what I would hope we could do is be closer to moving ahead on that project that will, we hope, continue to solve problems at the other schools.
I think we're all in consensus that we need to move forward, right, with Ames. I think everybody's...
Right, I think we have to define exactly the scope and all that, what's it going to be. But I think the current plan was 11.4. I don't know if that's really, needs to be 11.4, if it can be less than that, or that has to be defined. But I think, why don't do you want to take a straw poll and see on the specifically on the Ames and the Central lunchroom, if everyone is in agreement, so that we have, so there's no ambiguity then, that those have to move forward next year?
I think we should. I think we should at this point.
I think if you're limiting... if you're defining the Central lunchroom as a relatively simple initial, take out all those partition walls and create an open space that's usable for Pete and his kids, then yes.
That plan included taking out that structural wall.
Yeah,
Because that was considered as, we looked at total number of children, and, Pete gets it to use it functionally for a lunchroom for half of a student body. He would need that larger, there's sort of initially a smaller configuration. This is really, I guess, more what the committee looked at, and then there was taking down that structural wall. So we have to go back and look at, it's not just taking down the office wall partition.
I'm saying...
I just want to be clear about that. Sorry. Okay.
So
that taken into account,
is that
there's
major?
no way I'd support the structural wall. That's opening a whole can of worms and costs that are unfathomable at this point.
Wait, you said,
True
say
enough.
that again?
Say that again?
You don't support that?
Not the structural wall, no.
Then we can't have a multipurpose room there.
Pete has the ability to work within things, but once you start talking about structural walls,
That's what balloons the cost.
That balloons the cost.
But it's feeding 200 children, to make it functional as a lunchroom, and decouple it from Hauser's we've talked about. We talked about feeding 200 children at a time, roughly 200, minus.
Because we have 400 at school, yes? Okay.
And some are kindergartners, so.
Two rotations of lunch, right? Yeah.
No, it's like
No, it's on-
two-third,
So
one-third.
let me ask this question, and I might be getting too much into the weeds, but we're talking about putting a multipurpose room for lunch.
Large group learning, I would say large group, we've talked about all of the multipurpose room, lunchroom, large group learning. Like, these are not just cafeteria lunchroom.
Right, but we're looking to decouple the lunchroom that should.
That's one of the goals.
Right. I guess so many other schools have lunches in their gyms. Why can't we just have?
Central's gym is actually small, the
It's too small.
smallest gymnasium,
It's
it's a
not big
very
enough.
small
Yeah.
gym. And so they have really the largest elementary population, and to eat lunch in there with the scheduling and the size are both are
The
problematic.
gym is about half the size of this gym.
It's very small. I don't think it would function.
Yeah.
And there's gym classes going so many more times during the day.
The other thing is, we bought the property in Harlem expressly for this purpose. That's the only reason we bought the property in Harlem, was to put a lunchroom at Central. There's no other reason, in my view.
See, I looked at it as that was part of the reason. I mean, there was a lot more.
What was the other reason?
I mean, to deal with the crowding issue. I mean,
but that was the use for that space that we had intended, I think. I mean, as far as I
Well,
understood it.
we've also, so actually, and it's already been drafted, is using the downstairs as it exists for next year, and then with the renovation, how it would be used differently then into the future. So it's useful. It's useful tomorrow, I mean, if we were, but it's not useful for the goal of helping the Hauser lunch situation and potentially the Hauser start time. It's useful to Central School, but it's not useful to the Hauser Central issue.
Sherry, do you mind starting us off?
You always do that.
I like you, Sherry. That's
Yes, I'm happy to do it. I definitely support moving forward with Ames. I think we have a reasonable enough amount of plans for that school that we can tweak, the cost here and there. I think we can have a more in-depth discussion with Carrie, but I think that needs to be the imperative, and quickly. We've spent a lot of time talking about that school. For the other schools, I still think that we could hash over some more plans. I don't feel like we've discussed them enough. I am all for, if we're going to move the district office, to using that district office space for a lunchroom, or whatever we're going to call it, as soon as possible. I don't know about the details about what Joel's saying about with the structural issues, but it has a huge impact on the Hauser schedule, which benefits not just one school, every school in this community. So I think if we could find a way to talk about that, I'm all for it. But I like the idea of staggering. I'm not ready to talk about the other projects until I see some more drawings. I just can't.
Dan, do you want to follow up?
I'm of similar mind. I would say that some of what I've heard here tonight about Central lunchroom gives me pause. I would definitely like to hear more about that. I definitely agree that the solving or contributing to a solution to problems with Hauser lunch and scheduling would be the most optimal use of that space, at least on the surface. But the idea of cutting out structural walls and the added cost for that is definitely something that we should find out more about. In addition to the rest of the plans, I'm in agreement with Sherry. We haven't heard enough about it yet.
Thank you, Dan. Who wants to go next? Want to go last? Linda?
No.
Okay.
No.
I feel like everybody knows what you and I think.
Oh, yeah.
But, go ahead.
No, go ahead, no.
I agree with what Sherry and Dan said. I think it makes total sense. I mean, to emphasize, this is not to say that all of the other projects are unimportant. We're not going to do them. They're going to be deferred until 2029. That's not that's not the, I think,
I don't think
my
that's any
view,
of our
it's more
goals.
that-
No,
That's
nobody
that
would support
We have to
that.
start somewhere. We have to focus. It's too big to be trying to do everything at once, especially since we haven't really analyzed all of the other pieces in detail. But these are some things we have to do, especially given the time frame that I think Martha told us, the architect said we need to get rolling on the Ames thing if we hope to start in the summer of 2020, which I think is all of our
Prove it now.
goals. So I think
Can we
that's,
make an action item tonight?
so that's from my
let's
point of
get
view,
some
those are
bids, man.
the two things we start with, and while we continue to talk about
I know,
everything else,
I know.
continue to refine the cost and all that. And it's not the last conversation, but it's a sort of a first
No,
step.
I understand.
That's my view.
Joel?
I think removing some of my passion, aims and then really clearly thinking about what its knock-on effects are for the rest of the district and something very limited at Central. And I agree with and support second, third, the comments that Dan and Sherry made about the rest of it really needs some good thinking before we move forward with it.
By the way, I do support, agree with what Joel said earlier about that structural wall, is I think that needs some analysis before we delve into that, see how much that would cost.
Sure,
obviously.
yeah, I don't
If it's
think
easy to
we
do
haven't
and-
really
See
heard
much
a lot
cost
about that.
and what are the risks of it as well?
Exactly.
Right, we haven't heard about that yet, so.
Dave?
I mean, let's start Ames tomorrow. So,
Did you bring a
and that's
shovel?
pretty much where my support ends. I really don't want to do, I mean, we have district offices that are moving out of Central, so let's use that space for where appropriate, but I don't want to really do anything else to any school until we've gone through and assessed, because I want to make sure that we are equitable with all the schools. And so pretty much my support ends at Ames until we assess everything else, because Ames is going to benefit everything. So.
Fair enough. I think that we need to move ahead at Ames. And we need to do a deeper look at Ames. I'm not necessarily comfortable with an $11 million project at Ames, but I think we need to look a little bit deeper at that, but definitely start in earnest on that project. That doesn't diminish the merits of the other projects in any other way. I'm just concerned about delaying what we know and what we all really hope to be a real solution for the entire district at Ames. We can't delay that any longer.
No.
We need to move ahead on that, and at the same time, continue to look deeper and create more options for the other schools.
Yeah, I definitely think we should move forward on Ames. I think of all the problems that are listed, whether the solution is what we currently see or not. I think as we're moving forward with Ames, we have to have the Facility Advisory Committee to keep analyzing the rest, because I don't know that I could prioritize anything after after starting Ames. I'm a big proponent of the secure fund entrances. I don't want to wait 5 years for that either. So for me, we need to start moving forward, but within having a general idea of how much money total we want to spend, and then being able to stay within budget, but solving the needs of everything we looked at. Like I don't think there's one that we can leave off. I don't, but yes, I'm absolutely 100% of let's do Ames 3 months ago. We should have I don't know if there's a board action. I know we can't take one now at the next meeting to say, let's proceed with this,
I mean, DLA has said they really would need board approval of a proposal March. Potentially, we could convert the April cow to a special meeting so that we could discuss a proposal at the March 20th board and potentially approve it April 6th. To move into schematic and construction drawing phases.
Yeah, because we haven't seen those details yet.
No.
Yeah, at all.
Well, it sounds like there's unanimous consent then to proceed to the next step with Ames.
Yep.
And it sounds like there's broad interest, not unanimous, but broad interest in at least exploring the central lunchroom. See if that is an option. What would be required, in terms of structural work and all the rest. So,
I think maybe I took a different take on this polling, but I take that we're looking at Central, but all the schools.
And it's certainly all of the schools.
All the schools at the same time we're looking at Central, not just sort of looking at Central as NICS, but looking at all the schools.
Well, I took it from what people were saying, that there was not unanimous, but broad interest in doing Central, starting Central at the same time as Ames for the lunchroom, if possible. There's a
Yeah, I think
structural
there's
issue
this
there,
light
but maybe I
majority in that.
misread what people said.
Jeff, I think what you, Central is fine to look at as long as it's a very limited.
Correct. Right.
Capital investment.
Exactly. That was my thinking, is that that's a limited capital investment. We can get something for Hauser, we can decouple Hauser's schedule right away. And the reason I think it's important to decouple Hauser is because, we've talked about this many times. The idea is that, the huge advantage of starting the school day later for these adolescents who basically go through this phase when they start sleeping later and all the rest. And so that would be a real benefit, I think, to these kids. But I agree with you. I wouldn't want to start a huge project at Central until we've gone through all the analysis. But if we can do an easy project, then...
Quick question, Jeff, and maybe I'm just not remembering the discussions on the Hauser lunchroom, but the real issue with the shared lunchroom at Hauser and Central is that the Hauser kids have to eat lunch so early.
Yeah, that's one issue. Early and late.
I didn't remember that actually changes when the start time is.
Yeah, we talked
It has
about
an impact on shared staff, and so there's a whole staffing configuration. So it's not just the use of the lunchroom, it's really the impact on the staff that then support children and get their own staff members to get their lunch. I mean, Meryl and April and Pete and Christy Mullen analyzed this last year. I mean, it looks easy, like just move everything a half hour later.
Right, I remember that conversation, right, I remember that analysis. The thing to remember...
The only solution to actually creating a lunch schedule that can work for Hauser that's not at 10 in the morning or 1 in the afternoon is to get Central out. We can't reallocate just the times that Hauser eats, and then for Hauser to start later, they have to come out because it's a staggered start time between elementary and middle. It doesn't work for them to start later with the 3 lunch periods and Central lunch.
And the thing to remember, about these plans is there's nothing in these plans for Hauser. This is the only thing. I mean, we were talking about this as a Central project, but this is a Hauser project.
It's a Hauser
just as much as Central. And I think that we have to remember there's nothing in these plans
Because
otherwise.
the Central kids get the priority choice for their times for lunch because they're younger and we don't expect them to wait. We don't expect the little people to wait until 1 o'clock to eat,
That, and they also share staff with the other elementary schools, and they're already...
I think that's why that was decided,
Right, because shared staff that are going back and forth between Central and Hollywood, Hollywood's lunchtime is 11:25, and Central's is 11:40 because of Hauser, so we already lose some capacity with our shared staff.
Okay. Yeah, I remember that was with you and Ms. May, right? We had a presentation about, Okay.
I can resend it.
That would be interesting, thank you, because I know I could look back, but I wouldn't remember what date it was.
I'll find it.
Thank you.
Dan, you were saying?
I'm going to amend my original answer in that in addition to the things that we've discussed here as well, I think one more analysis that's definitely important that's been brought up to us tonight is while we're looking at construction options and estimates, I think it's just as important to look at options and estimates for that 1.4%.
Yeah.
And how we're going to, it seems like that's dramatically important to us.
Yeah.
That's something we'll need to explore as well.
That we need to be sure we can actually say that much.
Yes.
Right, absolutely. And what that means
And I think that Mr. Fitton did an excellent job in laying out these options and doing the analysis. And, one thing that strikes me is even if we can get that 1.4%, even if we spend the 15 million out of our current fund balance, that takes us down to the 46% in 10 years. That's maybe a little bit higher than our policy, but I don't think anyone would say, let's go to half that. I think that basically that tells us that even if we have the savings, which hopefully we can have the savings, we allocate the money from our fund balance, the sort of any significant additional amount of money is going to have to come from some kind of referendum, whether that's
there's a long-term issue there.
There's a long-term issue there, basically. It's not going to be through, one of the things we talked about earlier was the debt certificates. That's not going to work. That's not going to solve the problem, basically. So that means our options are really some kind of referendum, whether it's a debt service extension base or these bonds or something else. So it's a more sort of involved process, I think we have to think about.
To give you an idea of what it would cost a homeowner on one of these referendums. So on a $400,000 house, to get to 7.2 million, for my example, would probably be about $300 a year on a $400,000 house for the 5 years, and then we could cut it back for the board at that time or continue it. But it would have an impact, $300 a year on a $400,000 house, so that if you went more or less, go off of that number.
One last point I want to make, and I want to thank Linda for bringing this up. Safety and security is of utmost importance to everyone on this board, and we should be receiving recommendations from an industry professional that we can then take back into a planning phase. But that priority is diminished in no way.
And I can just share a few process steps. So on Friday of this week, DLA will be back to meet with each of the principals at Hollywood Central and at Blythe to do an additional walkthrough, which was something that was recommended by the Facility Advisory Committee. We also have a security consultant coming in on March 11th, specifically to look at Central. And then we have a Facility Advisory Committee meeting scheduled for March 13th. And sort of all with this goal of getting as much of this done as possible by the March 20th board meeting, so we can continue to bring you up-to-date information. As Jeff shared, there is this goal of potentially approving this DLA proposal to begin to move forward with the Ames project. And I think that's, that's why this conversation tonight is so important. But there is what started to feel like a pretty tight timeline to consider that for completion for fall of 2020-2021 school year.
Also, I'd like to say thank you for putting that in perspective, like what the additional cost would be to the homeowners. I appreciate that. It's helpful.
All right, are we prepared to move on to the final topic for finance? Yeah. Mr. Fitton has a little, Mr. Tofano.
It's not interconnected to all that.
Mr. Fitton is yielding minutes to Mr. Tofano to talk to us about online fee payment.
Yes. Just wanted to provide an update. A lot of the information that was contained in the update was information that was provided in October. This kind of outlines communications that are going to be going out to parents, just as information of what is coming, and then in terms of timeline, and then there are going to be some process changes. So really, not going to focus on the stuff that we covered in the past. Really get more along the lines of the timeline. With the new online fee payment program, which is going to be PushPoint, we're decided to roll it out at the time with around registration and associated registration fees with that. We currently do use the Illinois e-pay system, so we need to kind of sunset that and then have some lag time in between in which we can identify what fees are still outstanding, and then have, when we open up the PushPoint platform, it'll have outstanding fees incorporated into parent accounts. So in terms of the process changes, we're going to have to we'll discontinue the Illinois e-pay, which would be at the end of March, end of this month. With regards to collection of fees, we're really shifting the collection of fees to really, we want to try to collect as many fees as possible via the PushPoint system. And fee collection, really shifting collection if parents do want to pay in person, whether it be cash, check, that would take place at the district office, so that we wouldn't do any collection at the schools, and really shift that to just doing it at district office. With registration fees, the shift is really that we're separating the registration process from our payment processes, in that registration will be an entity and a process in and of itself, and then we will apply fees to the parent's PushCoin payment account. So the timing of that also does shift. We have, for instance, we open up kindergarten registration tomorrow. So while a large portion of those that will be registering, those will be students that are new to the district, coming into the district for the first time. There are a portion that are technically returning students because they participate in the Early Learners Program. So because PushCoin is fed via our student information system, this is where we also have a delineation between kind of existing accounts and what will be future accounts. So once we open up the registration tomorrow for kindergarten parents, and actually really anybody that would be new to the district come fall of this year, they will register. Now, those students don't make it into our student information system until summer, until after we do our rollover. So the shift for parents of new students coming into the district is that no payment is going to be due immediately, and those fees will be applied after the rollover, and that will take place in mid-July. For parents of returning students, the registration window is going to open in April, and then shortly thereafter, the Pushcoin portal will open. And then when parents go into the portal, they will see any outstanding fees, and their registration fees and any other fees associated with that would be applied to their account. And then the payment on that would be, at their, we're going to have a due date of 15th of the month on fees and so forth. So the shift really is just the timing, and that we have a small portion that won't be essentially billed or invoiced until mid-July. From the standpoint of the incorporating the POS, the point of sale system for Central and Hauser in the Hauser cafeteria, that we're going to look to potentially do during the last trimester. But we also might push it off until the start of next year. Depends on what we can fit in, and does it make sense to shift that system sooner rather than just waiting until the start of next year. So that's still kind of out there in terms of timing of that. But in terms of the communication that we want to send out to parents, a lot of that information is really contained in this, just to say that this is coming, what the change in our processes are going to be, and when they can anticipate seeing fees showing up on their accounts within Pushcoin.
I have a question about how does the system deal with optional activities, like say Cougar Advance? Parent doesn't have to agree to send their child, but they want to, and how are these options? Are the school leaders going to put in to the system these options for parents to choose?
Yeah, what we're really going to try to do is collect everything.
Right, if you don't want them going to, so are the principals going to be sending in their options?
I've been working with building leaders to identify all the types of fees that they have.
Right, because some are mandatory, and then there's some just that are optional.
Exactly, and so there are going to be essentially like a la carte items.
Okay.
But we will have items.
Will they be building segregated? Will you be able to look at what you're building? Okay.
Yeah. You should only see really based on grade level.
Okay.
What types of fees would apply.
So we don't know who you are and where your children are. Okay.
Exactly. We're also going to tie it into programs. So if students are participating in a particular program that has a fee associated with it, then those fees would be applied. We also want to incorporate, if a student purchases an extra lock, they lose their lock, that they can purchase that. So we're really trying to shift everything. We are going to be meeting with the PTOs. We could potentially even collect some PTO related items, and then that money just really funnels through Pushcoin, and then can be deposited directly into a PTO account.
Because we buy a lot of T-shirts for clubs and orchestra and robotics.
The only thing
I know I'm always writing a check or giving cash, so it would be interesting to see.
Right. The only thing we can't do is provide a refund from that outside organization.
Right.
So.
Right. That'll be the tricky part, I think.
Well, we would just ship to them.
Refunds for things like that, though?
Yeah, you would hope so.
It seems very, very useful to have this automated system. Currently, we do a lot of this manually, I assume, right? We do are we going to be freeing up some resources then with
time?
I think that's to be determined, because we are shifting some. There are some. Since, for instance, the fee collection since we're not doing it at the schools, it's going to happen in central office. While it's going to, we're shifting burden in that instance, I think it really will depend on the amount of participation within, how much parents really adopt it. But I think from a convenience standpoint, this is really a system that is geared to make it easier for parents to do it, because you will get, It is a mobile-friendly website, so it operates like an app on your smartphone. Parents can, by default, notifications are set up so that every transaction your child makes, you're aware of it. And so, but as far as, overall, in terms of efficiencies, I think that'll be something that hopefully we'll be able to provide some feedback on. I think we'll also probably have some better tracking of, more real-time tracking of outstanding fees. And then, and granted, while it's year one, then obviously in future years, we'll be able to, report back on timing of fee collection, and, what hasn't been paid, so forth. So I think overall, I think it's going to provide a
Can you
greater
remind
level
us
of
for
oversight.
like school lunch, would the child's money be preloaded by the parent, or is it every time, or is it just per use that the child uses it and then there's an expense, or is the parent allowed to preload?
It's
how much?
preloaded.
Okay.
The student accounts, they call them wallets. So the
Yes.
student has
So
a
they'll
wallet.
have some money in their wallet.
Right, so parents can actually, if you have three children, you can divvy up funds,
Okay.
deposit funds into the wallets and shift money between them, or even pay outstanding fees with balances that remain on wallets. The other thing is that if a child's wallet is down to zero,
Yeah.
and they're in the lunch line, they're not going to be denied a lunch. They will go into a negative balance.
Okay.
So that's something that will also, and it'll eliminate our current ticketing system of lunch tickets.
Which is really awkward too, for the children.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Can a parent restrict the total amount that's spent in any given day?
How much
I
are
think
you
for the
buying?
conversation, yes. No,
That conversation never works.
I can find out about that. But I think that it is designed to allow them to go into a negative balance, because I think even by law, we can't deny.
Well, but I'm saying a minimum lunch, whatever that costs, if it's $5 or $7, you can set that at that point, but not allow the extra.
I would wonder, would we have a default email to let somebody know, the balance is at X
Is
number of
it-
dollars, $10, or whatever the
Right.
throsheld might be? Would that make sense to have that as a default
Have
communication?
a minimum so you're not into the negative numbers?
Yeah.
Notification of a loan.
Right, and I think with the, not having seen one of their notifications in terms of when they make a transaction, that could very much also be a part of that notification when you see a transaction come in, you're seeing a transaction and a balance.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Mr. Tufano? Great.
Thank you.
Before we turn it over to Dan, I'd just like to remind people that I was only 5 minutes over time. Once we add Sherry's 20.
That was not my fault.
So-
Respond to the questions that are asked.
Rich,
Not my fault.
Before we go to policy, do we feel like we have unambiguous direction here? I mean, because to me, I feel, but sometimes I feel we leave the meetings and I feel like we've given unambiguous direction, but then other people disagree. So do you, are we all in agreement that we have?
That's a great.
Just make sure.
I feel like it's clear. Does anybody at the table feel like it's not clear?
The only thing I will add is that if we are going to examine a proposal for Ames, it is Ames as designed, and at the schematic and construction phase, there can be some modifications, but it doesn't go back to the design table, because going back to the design table would be, I mean, if that's what the board wishes, but that's a whole nother layer of sort of
My answer
delay.
is that we're going forward with the design phase at Ames.
We're going to what?
We're going forward with the design. The design phase.
Yeah, but what that means, what Martha is saying is that, Martha, if I think I know what you're saying, it's that the last proposal goes into deeper design. And I think that's the right question to ask. I think that that design needs further value engineering.
Wait, can costs be addressed with the further, deeper design concepts we're going to be given?
Yes.
So Mark,
Because I understand that the footprint, they want to be that footprint.
You're saying that we're not going to like suddenly move
Generally.
we have the footprint behind the school now, and we're not going to sort of say, no, let's put it over on the other side again. We're kind of in agreement where more or less it's
That
gonna
we've
be.
agreed on a concept.
But the exact configuration of the rooms and how many, the sizes and all that, that's all
I thought
still
Carrie said we could still
a little
talk
bit
about
up
those
in-
things.
Well, and that's-
Schematic phase, yeah.
Right.
Schematic phase would
And what is
further
Martha?
flesh out where those rooms
Yeah.
are, where
Yeah.
the corridors
Yeah,
are.
that's what she kept saying, we don't need to look at it.
No, I'm saying, I was
Footprints
wondering if she
that
asking
we've
us to
defined
change
is what we're
anything.
running with,
Okay.
right?
That's my
Yeah,
understanding.
yeah,
right?
I would say that's.
Yeah.
Because say we further flesh things out and then we think, oh, that could be a little bit smaller, that's still part of that.
That's concept design, yeah, this is not,
Right. I would hope it wouldn't be set until because we haven't really seen any
haven't seen
details
any, yeah.
at all. Yeah.
Just, yeah.
Okay, good.
Okay. Okay.
Over to you, Dan.
Okay, in rather anticlimactic fashion, I have nothing to report this evening.
I think it's even faster in here. So,
Thank you.
let's see here. Okay, so if there's no further comments, then the future meetings are March 20th, regular business, 7 p.m. at Hauser. April 3rd, committee of the whole, 7 p.m. at Ames. April 17th, regular business meeting, 7 at Hauser. And then April 30th, the biennial organizational meeting, committee of the whole meeting, at 7 p.m. at Hauser. So if there's no further business, meeting adjourned.
If you did have a big press release right now, I would have been like.